The BYU Cougars made quick work of Queens University out of North Carolina and left no doubt as they improved to 3-0 on the season. What's to take away from a blowout of this variety? Well, we're talking about that and also talking about two new signings for the BYU men's basketball program. This is a Locked On Cougars postcast.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. The BYU men's basketball program improved to 3-0 on the season with a 99-55 rout of Queens University out of North Carolina. Don't confuse it with Queens, New York, or any other Queens variety. Now, this was a game that I'm not going to lie, I was bored. Quite honestly, BYU had a 33-point lead at one point in the first half, and had they decided to keep the pedal down and maybe defend it a little harder, because they seemed to let up a little bit at the end of that first half, they very well could have kept Queens, at 10, 11, 12 points. Now, the Royals, as their mascot is, finished with a little bit of a flourish as they rallied to make it a little bit closer at halftime. But in the second half, as Kevin Young alluded to in postgame comments, and also Dawson Baker, who had a standout performance, we'll get to that momentarily, alluded to, there was a timeout. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was the second media timeout. It might have been the first in the second half. BYU was playing a little lackadaisical from Coach Young's perspective. And he said he sat down in their huddle and challenged them. Lock back in. Make this a time where you guys can focus and get yourselves back on the same page. He felt like things were just a little bit too loose, and his team was not focused, is the term that he used. And you saw him locked down at that point. And Dawson Baker talked about it. Trevin Nell alluded to it. And that was a positive to see BYU, despite the fact that they were just absolutely crushing Queens. They could have essentially named their score in this matchup. They still were able to channel and say, okay, you know what? Let's lock back in. Let's go do our thing defensively, offensively. Let's get the deal done. And they roll their way to a victory, 99-55. Standouts of the game, undoubtedly, is good to see Dawson Baker leading the Cougars with 22 points, 6 3-pointers, as I understand it, is a career high for him, even during his time in the Big West and at UC Irvine. So he was hot from deep, and I talked two games ago after the first game that he struggled offensively. I said, we need to see more from Dawson Baker. Well, this is what you want to see. 22 points. Yeah, that's maybe more than he's actually going to contribute on a night in and night out basis, but it was good to see him doing his thing out there. Trevin Nell, the quote shot doctors, Mark Pope called him the last couple of seasons. He had a good start as well. I think he had 14 points in the first half to lead BYU in scoring in that first half. He ended up, let's see, double check this, with 16 points overall in the night, 6 of 9 from the field, 4 of 7 from three. And more importantly, BYU as a team, 15 of 35 from three, so 42.9%. You'll take that every single time in terms of the shooting percentages, 51.3% from the field. And then limiting Queens to 34.5% and 36.7% from three. And I think they not had that lull, kind of that middle 6-ish minutes from the end of the first half into the early part of the second half. They very well could have made this an even bigger blowout. But hey, you will always take a 44-point victory. There's zero doubt about it. It will help kind of offset that UC Riverside game. Remember, it was an 86-80 final, and that obviously affects the ratings when it comes to KenPom and eventually the what they call it, the net rating now. All those different things. When you have blowout wins, it helps kind of course correct from what was a closer than expected score against UC Riverside. So overall, a very solid night for BYU. Kebakete had a second straight double-double, 11 points, 13 rebounds. He talked in post-game how he just wants to be aggressive and go get as many rebounds as possible and kick it out to his teammates, because he said this is the team, the most threes of a team he's ever played on. They like to get hoisted up, and his job is to do some of that dirty work in the middle and get those balls, dig them out in terms of those rebounds and ship them out to his teammates, let them go up and hoist up those threes. So I think a lot of good contributions across the board. Jaeger Demon, who's kind of been the headliner for BYU, kind of a ho-hum night relative to the first two games, still had 14 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists. He did have 3 turnovers in this game, but shot 6 and 9 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. Did nothing that makes you think he's in any trouble in terms of falling back. He's just kind of doing his thing. So overall, I thought it was a very positive performance for BYU, and that'll turn their attention to taking on Idaho on Saturday afternoon. It'll be a 1 o'clock matinee start ahead of the BYU football game later that night against Kansas. Now, I also wanted to talk before we go on this postcast about two signings to the BYU men's basketball program today. Those are Xavion Staton out of the Las Vegas area, and now Orem High School signing former Lone Peak player Chamberlain Burgess. Both of them big man forward types. Chamberlain Burgess more of that kind of stretch 4 variety, where Xavion Staton is a true 5-man, a guy who's going to protect the rim. We had Kevin Young talk about a post-game, said Xavion Staton, he believes is the best rim defender in this recruiting class, and BYU is able to land him. If you didn't note this, I'll note it for you right now. Xavion Staton, according to recruiting rankings, is the highest rated signing in program history. He actually outclasses what Yair Demon's recruiting ranking was. And the only person that's going to pass him up, if it comes to fruition, is AJ DeBonsa. Now, DeBonsa said that he is going to move up his recruiting timeline from what was originally expected to be a commitment in February. He'll be doing that in December. So we'll see if next month BYU gets some extra good news with this recruiting class, but it's off to a solid start. Xavion Staton, really intriguing prospect, has all the size you want in this offense, has the ability to play vertically, as Kevin Young alluded to in his comments about Staton. And I really think that this is going to be a kid that is going to be a sensation when he arrives at BYU. He's recruited by the likes of Stanford, so you know he's got the brains to go with the brawn. And I love that fact about this young man. And then Chamberlain Burgess, last name should sound familiar. He's the nephew of Chris Burgess on BYU's staff. His dad played at BYU. His mom played at BYU, for that fact. And it's a family affair when it comes to Chamberlain Burgess. He is expected to go on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints before enrolling at BYU. But I think it's not going to hurt him to any large degree. He's a 4-star prospect, shows, as Kevin Young talked about, a little bit of everything. Can handle the ball, can play inside, can step out and hit the 3. It really is a nice thing to have in terms of his overall skill set to join the BYU basketball program, even if it is going to be a few years before you ultimately see him in a BYU uniform. Kevin Young, he said he's still figuring out what he's doing as a college coach in some respects, but he talked about the fact that in terms of what he does when he goes recruiting, is he points to what he's done at the NBA level, as Mitch Harper talked about in postgame, proof of concept of what so he talked about Xavion State, and he said, hey, Xavion, this is what I want you to do at BYU, and here's why it's going to work for you, and here's who I've worked with in the past. You can talk about guys like Joel Embiid, who he's worked with the Philadelphia 76ers. A guy like Chamberlain Burgess, he can point to any number of guys who's played on the perimeter for him during his NBA days and say, that's what I want you to be. I want you to be able to step out on the perimeter, make plays, because basketball more and more is becoming a positionless game. You got to have the skill set to be able to do essentially everything. It's very rare that you see a guy who specializes in just one thing who is a standout player. You have to be multifaceted, and I think both Chamberlain Burgess and Xavion Staton are that. Xavion Staton may be a little more limited in terms of his offensive ability right now, but there's no reason to think he can't develop that skill set and be able to hit the 3 every now and again, stepping outside. But if you can be a vertical lob threat at minimum and protect the rim at an elite level, guess what? The NBA needs guys like that. So the nice part is Kevin Young is playing to his strengths as a recruiter. He's talking probably with guards about how the fact that Devin Booker just absolutely loves him and what he did to help Devin Booker become the player he is, a perennial all-star in the NBA. Chris Paul, just think of all the guys that Kevin Young has worked with. He can absolutely connect with every one of these young men he hits on the recruiting trail and say, okay, here's what I've done in the NBA, and here how it worked, here's how I developed these guys, and here's how I'm going to do it for you if you come to BYU and play for us. So great day for BYU. A win, obviously, is a good thing, but more importantly, 2 high-level prospects joining the BYU basketball program. You'll take that every time. So nice day for BYU. And I also want to give a shout-out. I should give a shout-out to the BYU women's basketball program. Not to be outdone, they are now 3-0 as well. They got a win earlier today. It was a matinee affair, 11 a.m. for them in that game. But BYU basketball programs, plural right now, 6-0 overall. So good start to the season for Amber Whiting as well as Kevin Young. And here's to many, many more wins to come in the days and weeks ahead. But once again, BYU men's basketball back in action on Saturday, taking on Idaho. We'll have more on this as the week progresses, but stay tuned. Tomorrow, our regularly scheduled program will be a crossover edition with Locked On Jayhawks host Derek Johnson, getting you up to speed on everything you know about Kansas ahead of that football game on Saturday night. So I'll sign off now. A big thank you, as always, to all of you for making sure you check out Locked On Cougars, making your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.